floor here, and then we've got the students in the bleachers. Let's start now with the first item on the agenda. If we were to talk about Italian football, we're talking about an eminence in psychopedagogy, Francesco Tonucci. He's the star of his field. He's from Italy, and he looks at traditional educational models, but wants to focus on children based on play, based on free investigation, free exploration. And according to Francesco Tonucci, learning has to be a creative process with no pressure, where everybody learns at their own speed, at their own pace. Tonucci is a researcher at the Institute of Psychology of the National Research Center of Rome, Council of Rome. And in addition to his pedagogical work, he's known for his alter ego, Frato, with whom he draws comic strips that humorously criticize the educational system and the daily challenges that children have. His project, called The City of Children, published in 1991, proposed an urban model designed to guarantee the safety and autonomy of the youngest, promoting public spaces that encourage a more inclusive and equitable society for all. Friends, young students, participants, let's give a huge round of applause to Francesco Tonucci. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I dressed up for you, but if you don't mind, I'd like to feel a bit more comfortable. I'll take my jacket off, if you don't mind.
Bueno.
I gave you a bit of a provocative title, but that's not my intention. A city will be educational if it allows girls and boys to educate themselves, or allows girls and boys to learn themselves. Now, educating themselves alone is what I mean. That's the opposite of being educated. The general idea is that when a child is born, a long time goes by in which practically nothing happens. It's a preparation phase during which the most important thing is to look after and protect the child, to ensure that the child can reach the most important stages of life in the best possible physical condition. That appears to be the only important thing at that stage in a child's life. When Sigmund Freud was asked in an interview about the most important year of his life, he answered, undoubtedly the first. And it's true, actually. It's not true that children are waiting for what was once called the age of reason, which coincided with the child's school years, when the child started to learn so-called important things: writing, talking. What I'd like to start with is by describing how, on the contrary, children start their life experience in a totally different fashion, by discovering things and by playing. The two strong experiences with which children start to enter the world are surprise and play. For example, that's how children learn to talk. They start to talk. It's interesting to think about the fact that nobody teaches children to speak. And after they've learnt that, they continue talking throughout their lives. And they learn that alone, by discovering how to talk, by being surprised. There's a point after a few days when children discover that the air that comes out of their mouths can make a noise. Obviously, they cry, and that makes a noise, but probably the children were so involved in crying, in the pain or rage, I don't know what it was, but they haven't had a chance to think about it. Nevertheless, at one point, they make a noise, and that surprises them. So much so that they'd like to do it again, but they don't know how. Until it happens again. And then it happens again. And again. Until the children work out how to make that noise on their own. And that leads to the start of a new stage in the lives of children. What in Italian we call la lazione, and you call babbling. A stage parents are very aware of. It's sometimes a bit annoying when children babble, ba 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 ba, and they play with their voices. That is of extreme importance, because at some strange point in time, by pure coincidence, Mama comes out of the child's mouth, and the family jumps up as if someone had just scored a goal. He said, Mama. No, he was just playing, or she was just playing. But they've said, Mama, and the family congratulate the child. They call the grandparents. It's a moment I'm sure all families, all parents remember. And the child, seeing how successful they've been, repeats that noise, and discovers that these words, despite not knowing that they're words, have an impressive effect. When the child says, Mama, the child's mum appears. So these are noises that lead to the appearance of the most important person in their life. So that bolsters their confidence, and then they continue to call. That's how children discover words. And that continues, of course, for the rest of their lives. And that's how children discover drawing. They discover it because, by chance, moving their hand, they leave a mark. And that surprises the child. Normally, the hand that moves doesn't leave any trace or mark. But in this case, the hand was holding a felt tip pen, for example, and the children hadn't realized, and then they see that mark, and the same thing happens, and then they realize that they can go and find something that leaves a mark, and they start with the new experience of scribbling. In Italian, we say carabocchi, scribbling. It's a bit of a demeaning word, but actually, on the contrary, it's a form of art, because that marks the start of the children's experience of graphic expression through play, playing in this case with signs and marks. We could say, okay, we accept that, but then we have to wait until the children turn 6 and go to school to develop. But no, from the first days of a child's life up until they turn 6, all kinds of things happen. I'm not an expert. I don't know how to describe all of them, but I would just like to add something else before I move on to the issue on the agenda. At around 3 years of age, I heard my oldest child say, "Dad, I discovered," that was when he was 3, and I was surprised because my son said, "discovered." He said it right. And then he said it wrong. But I tried to understand what he was saying. And then what I understood made me afraid because I discovered that my son, at the age of 3, had understood. He knew that verbs can be conjugated. I'm almost scared to say it. And I was almost scared to say it because he was only 3. But now I know that all children at around the age of 3 make that discovery. They know that verbs can be conjugated. And in our languages, there are 3 conjugations: ARE, ERE, and IRE. And he got the past participle right. So he understood that the 3rd conjugation had to go in a certain way. This was impressive. Children discover rules and they apply them faithfully, almost religiously. And obviously, from that point on, who knows how many things children discover. I remember in Costa Rica once, in a children's school, I was talking to the children, and a 3-year-old boy said to me, "Do you know what, Francesco? My dog has deaded. He's deaded." And he was talking to me using the Italian form. And when my child was 6, he went to school. On the first day of school, the teacher asked him to fill the first page of his new exercise book with A's. 1 page full of the letter A. The teacher thought, the teacher understood and believed that my son, like all of his peers in the class, was ignorant and illiterate. But they had been conjugating verbs since the age of 3. That's one of the huge problems in education. Yesterday, I met children from here. We spent a great time together, and I told them about this, and I asked them, and I imagined, well, my son is now almost 60, so some time has passed since he was 3. Anyway, I was talking to 8 or 9 children, and I asked who had had to write a page full of A's. I think all of them, with the exception of 1, put their hands in the air. So today, we continue to think that a 6-year-old child is illiterate. This way of discovering, by surprise and through play, applies to all kinds of spheres in our life. to walking, eating, controlling one's sphincter, going to the loo, all of the things that take place at the start of our lives are discovered on our own. Some, I think, until about the 80s, some 40 years ago, this way of understanding or learning continued when, at the age of 5 or 6, no later, the front door was open because all children went to school on their own. Nobody took their children to school at that time. It was a huge problem doing that because the children were considered to be disabled, socially disabled, if their parents took them to school. It was hugely embarrassing for them. So all children would go out at an early age to get used to living in the street. And the learning continued in the street. It's called incidental learning. It happens by coincidence. And in the street, people learnt to find out about themselves and others, and to find out about gender and sex, and recognize that we're different physically and characteristically through play. I think that everybody knows about playing nurses and playing doctors. That's a fundamental phase in our childhood. And also people found out about danger, obstacles, and devised strategies to overcome those obstacles, to control them, to manage them, or even to avoid them. People learnt to fight and also to make peace, because tomorrow they wanted to play with their friends again. The experience of satisfaction, pride, and success, as well as frustration, the frustration of failure, was experienced. Frustration at the age of 5, 6, 7, or 8 is tough. But children get over it because tomorrow they want to go out to play again. We need to devise strategies to reform conflict. Experiencing frustration for the first time at the age of 14 can be terrible. Unfortunately, we're seeing an increase in suicide attempts for commonplace issues even. Discovering new things, following that idea of playing with words, going outside, discovering plants, animals, ways of being, little corners, ways to escape parents' control, all kinds of things. Yesterday, Joan-Carles, during his excellent presentation, said that belonging is impossible without otherness. And I thought, who knows if he's right? And then I thought about a case in which there is belonging without otherness. And that's precisely when children play without adults present. If there are no adults present, kids get together and they find ways to coexist, to get on together. And that's extremely important from the point of view of social integration through children. I could give you all kinds of examples, but unfortunately I don't have time. I'm just going to give you two. In summer, my family used to go to a tiny village, which was the village my wife came from, and there were practically no children, but it was a village where there were a lot of French immigrants, and it continues to be actually. And during the summertime, that village was full of children, French children. And my children would go out after breakfast. They'd come home for lunch. They'd disappear again after lunch. And then they'd come home again to have dinner. And I remember that I used to talk to them. And I'd say, "But what on earth are you up to?" "We're playing," they would reply. "But you're playing with children who speak a different language. You don't speak French," I said to them. And they didn't know what to say to me. But they went out nonetheless, every single day. And they knew how to play with children without understanding their language. Who knows how they did that? The other example is of a friend who said to me that her son always spoke to her about a friend called Pablo. I think he was in the first year of primary school, and she didn't know this Pablo. And one day, the teacher called her in for a chat, and the mother, when she was in the classroom, called her son and said, "Where's Pablo?" "Oh, Pablo's got the red jumper on," he said. Pablo was the only black boy in the class, and he was the one wearing the red jumper. Skin color meant absolutely nothing to this little boy. 40 years ago, something extremely strange happened. It was new, and it continues. The front door is now closed. Around the 80s, families from our countries, and there are lots of countries that we represent, decided that children could not go out of the house alone, that they needed to be accompanied. This new thing changed the lives of children completely, and it changed the lives of families completely, and the lives of cities. One had to work out what to do with children if they couldn't go outside the house to spend the afternoon with their friends. Before moving on to the second part of my presentation, upon which I like to spend quite a lot of time describing our proposal, I'd like to point out one thing. After that stage came school. And obviously, in the majority of cases, for example, the schools, the children I was talking to yesterday, where they learnt to write, filling a page full of A's, there was a drastic, not traumatic, but perhaps a little bit traumatic, there was a drastic change in that whole process of discovery. Everything was just ready-made, prepared. And that preparation is called a program. And the program is controlled by the teacher. And the role of children becomes listening. Learning because somebody's explaining something to you. And they're explaining something that isn't as interesting as when you look for it yourself, but they're explaining something that's already anticipated and planned. So it's the adults who become the protagonists rather than the children. And the adults believe that their pupils are empty vessels, more or less, into which they place new things. And then after some time, they can assess how full that vessel is. The extraordinary thing is that all of this happens in a situation of equality. Children are all the same age. It's extremely strange. It's as if they were twins, a class of twins, or a class of clones. It's like a horror film, but that's the case. That's what happened for all of us. Okay, it's not compulsory. It's not always the case. Marta Mata, for example, in spite of being a significant Catalan politician, she was also a very eminent teacher, and I was fortunate to know her, to be her friend. And Marta Mata was part of that world of schools wanting to be a teacher and believed that children had the right to discover and to continue discovering within and outside the school. The school was interested in what children brought in from the outside. I can't talk about technical issues, but the free text was access from outside into the school life, the school day for these teachers. Well, to understand better, I'm sure you're all aware of the film about the teacher that promised the children the sea, and this is exactly what I'm trying to describe. School, and teachers continue to exist, luckily. School started based on the children's experience. Children brought into school what they had experienced the previous afternoon. Teachers therefore didn't give homework, they didn't take up the children's time with ridiculous issues, sorry to say that. But they let the children experience important things such as free play so that they could then bring that experience into the school the following day. Those teachers still exist. Unfortunately, there are very few of them. Everybody should be like that, because that is one of the rights of children to this kind of education. I was saying that this opens up a whole issue. What do we do with children if we think that they can't go out into the street? And normally when there's a need, there are lots of interests at stake, economic and political, as well as social. So on the one hand, there's school. The school broadened the service provided. In Italy, my school, my children's school, they went there for 4 hours a day, from 8:30 till 12:30. Then they came home for lunch, and then off they went to play in the afternoon. But now school goes from 8:30 till 4:30. Not always, but the majority of schools. And then the teachers give homework. And the family's almost happy because the children have something to do in the afternoon, in what's remaining of the afternoon. And then after-school activities were invented. They didn't exist when I was a child. When I was a child, we just went out and played with a football. But now, no. You have to study football. It's totally different. You pay for it. There's a teacher. Obviously, it's a coach who teaches children how to play football. We played football with our own rules, imitating rules or inventing rules. That's for another conference. And so activities provide an opportunity to fill up a child's timetable today. It makes it almost fuller than their parents' timetable, because the parents obviously have to take their children to all of these activities. And they can't do the same thing, because if they want to do their activities, they can't guarantee that their children can do their activities. Oh, I forgot, says the speaker. I do apologize. I'll find it. I'll pick it up in a minute. This image is the image of Rana, a girl from Reggio Emilia, and I met her when I was visiting the school, Diana, one of the well-known schools in Reggio Emilia in Italy. I was a friend of Loris Maraguzzi, and I often went to Reggio Emilia. And Vanna was 6 when I met her. She was already at primary school. She went to Diana to say hi to her teachers, and I was there. And when the teachers showed me the picture that she'd drawn, it was a really detailed and great drawing for a 5 or 6-year-old girl. And I said to her, Vanna, but you're at primary school now. Do you have an exercise book? And Vanna showed me her exercise book. And I took this photo. This is the photo of Vanna's exercise book when she was 6, a drawing of 3 people, similar to the previous one. If I come back again and I have an hour free to talk to you about what happened to Vanna in those few months, a short time later, her work had changed drastically. Now, regarding what has to be done with children, there are lots of forces at play. The school broadens activities. Cities say, don't worry, vote for me and I'll create play spaces for children. These spaces exist throughout the world with swings and slides. In Italy, thank goodness, they're open. In other cases, unfortunately in Argentina, they're closed off, fenced off to protect the children. And children go, but they're only accompanied by adults. Therefore, they're going to spend a bit of time to play. That's what we think, that's what we tell ourselves, until they get tired. Because this is the agreement. I'll take you when you're tired, you tell me, and we'll go home. That's what the parents say. And what actually happens is something that should really concern adults, is that the children get tired. After they've queued to go on the swing or to go on the slide, they go to their parent and they say, Mom, Dad, I'm tired. And we can't say it, but we think, oh, thank goodness, let's go home. I've got loads of stuff to do at home. Although we shouldn't say that. So we think that we've fulfilled, the children have fulfilled as well, they've done their job, but what we don't think is that children never get tired when they're really playing. They forget about being hungry. They forget about needing the loo. Sometimes they wet their pants. But they continue to play. Our mother always used to call us and say, dinner's getting cold, it's ready, but we could not stop playing. A child who says, I'm fed up, I'm tired, hasn't really played. And then we saw toys, a company, a factory. There are even supermarkets and shopping centers full of toys and games. When I was a child, there were no toys. It was after the war. We played so much. If I could talk to you about how I played when I was a child, I'd take a whole morning to tell you. And there were no toys. Well, we used to build our own toys. Therefore, everything surrounding children costs a lot. Activities, toys, and then come the screens. TV was a nanny, a babysitter who looked after children. Sitting in front of the TV, there was no danger. But now, of course, we know that there are dangers. Dangers regarding attention, eyesight, all kinds of things. And then people started asking how long children should spend looking at screens. For the love of God, don't put TVs in children's bedrooms. But unfortunately, in many homes, TVs ended up in children's bedrooms. And then came mobile phones. Mobile phones. They resolve all problems. Mobile phones are in children's lives from the very first days of their lives. And I'm saying this with a certain amount of bitterness that mothers breastfeeding use the time when they're breastfeeding, when they have nothing to do, to read messages on their mobile phones and to exchange. And that is really dramatic. We have to teach these things in schools to girls and boys. We have to explain that they just can't do this, because in the first few days of a child's life, when the child is tired of breastfeeding, the child looks up at their mother. And of course, if their mother's looking at a screen, the child won't find their mother. That dialogue of the look is considered the start of a relationship. There are videos that I saw tens of years ago, taken in different cultures, and they repeat that game of glances between newborn children and their breastfeeding mother. People don't talk about this at school, or at least that's what I imagine. And mobiles are placed into the hands of months-old babies because they have songs and images designed for children of that age. It's no coincidence. Mobiles can be used to entertain children while we're at restaurants and keep them quiet. The majority of Italian children of primary school age own a mobile phone. Yeah, exactly. Parents tend to like this a lot because for us, it's been hard to get used to this marvelous machine containing a whole world that can solve all of our problems in one fell swoop. But for me, it's still complicated. A child learns how to use a mobile phone immediately. A 7 or 8-year-old child can discover everything that a mobile phone has to offer. So parents can't even imagine, they don't even suspect the use that children make of these phones. Today, we think that this is the biggest problem, the most serious problem pertaining to childhood. And it's interesting to note that the day before yesterday, the Children's City project it was the anniversary. It was established 35 years ago in my city, Fano, when I proposed the project to the council, and the council approved it. And during the presentation that I made to the council, and which I still have in my laptop because it's part of the minutes of the council. So my words feature in those minutes. And the first thing I asked in 1991 was for children to be able to go out of the house again, unaccompanied, to experience play. Believing, and I was clear about it then. All of us involved in children's development were clear about that. Play is the most important experience not of childhood, but of life. More important even than studying. Somebody who knew something about science, such as Einstein, said or wrote that play is the highest form of investigation or research. Therefore, play disappears from a child's experience when they can't go out to play. The verb play can't be conjugated with verbs such as accompany, control, supervise. It can be conjugated only with let or allow. Let them play. I'm scared, I don't know. Oh, my husband doesn't agree. Whatever you like. But the child won't play. There's no other way. Obviously, one of the things that we learned in the streets was to pay attention to family rules. My mum was scared. I was scared when my children were little too. But I had no other option. I let them go out, but I established rules. And children knew that if they didn't comply with the rules, there'd be consequences. In my childhood, when I was young, they were physical. But then there could be consequences such as if you don't obey, you won't go out tomorrow. I had to obey, but I could transgress those rules. Transgression is also an important experience. It's bad, but it's also important. And it's always hard to assess. I respect what I'm being asked to do, or should I not? And if I don't, I know that there will be consequences. This is how you learn moral sense, building moral sense, moral reasoning at the age of 4, 5, or 6, rather than starting at the age of 14, 15, and 16. Let's move on to the final part.
Este momento que yo pido a
So I reached out to the mayor's office in Fano and I said, I'd like my kids to be able to go out. I asked for this to be on the social and political agenda of the city, for the city to take this on, to invite kids out into the street, to invite families to let their kids go out, to start talking about this and why kids were no longer going out. Actually, we were completely confused about this. Normally people say kids can't go out because today's world, today's cities don't let them. And I'd like to go into this. Why? Why can't people go out in today's cities? You have all the data, all the figures today. Cities have all this information. You have police records and you have the information in the database, and you can check, for example, the last 40 years in Granollers to see if there's a higher degree of safety and security here, or if it's a lower degree. Now, I don't know that for Granollers, but I bet it's safer. Probably a good deal safer. We've probably seen a drop in crime and various types. Petty crimes, car crashes, deaths from car crashes. Sure, we have more cars, but they're safer. We have more laws that keep us safer. Of course, they're not enough, and these laws could be improved. But I still want to point out that the city where I was a kid, a city that was bombed, a city where we played in the ruins, very dangerous sites, actually. And that's where we played, among the rubble. So one thing isn't true. But what has changed is fear. Life is safer, but people are more afraid. And that's because of other social mechanisms like access to information. We can sometimes get obsessed about getting access to information. In my most recent trips to Spain, for example, I saw that the news on the TV, especially if something was a dangerous event, well, we would have the journalist talking, and then we'd see the same images sort of on loop behind them on the screen. And so that makes people think that these events are actually much more frequent than they are. And of course, we've seen this just multiplying with social networks. We have viral images now. So it doesn't just reach all of Spain, it reaches the world, the entire world. And that's the simple truth of the matter. It makes us think that these events are commonplace, incredibly frequent. And if you think they're commonplace, I didn't start at 9, I started at 9:15. I'm going to go for the full hour. My apologies. All right, so as I was saying, we've been putting together this international project, and we've got a campaign called I'm Going Out to Play. You know, we think that cell phones can be really powerful, but you can't simply tell a kid, I'm going to give it to you, but don't use it. I'm going to give you a phone, but I'm going to check how you're using it. No, you can't do that. We shouldn't be giving children cell phones until the age when they really need them, when they're useful. Something like 14 or 16. I'm not sure exactly what the age should be, but when kids actually need cell phones. So that's why we put together this project. I'm Going Out to Play. And we think kids, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12-year-olds could actually just go out and play with their friends every day without adults. And that would be way more fun than picking up a phone. I met with kids from many different countries. Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Portugal, Spain, Italy, just a month ago. We put together a little group of children from these different countries, and I had a chat with them. I asked them what they thought about cell phones, and I was pretty surprised by some of the things they said. They said they're dangerous. There's a ton of violence. We could get obsessed with our phones. It's like silent venom. You don't know who's inside the phone. Sometimes you see things that you just don't want to see. Cell phones make us blind. It's like a drug. It's not something you consume, it's something you see. We get caught up by our phones, and when we get called out to play, we don't want to go out to play. It was a small group of kids, and I had this idea that I'm just going to repeat here by way of conclusion. This group of kids, well, you're aware of what we're talking about. The fact that you're telling me this means you know this. And so I would like to suggest that you are the leading figures in this fight. It shouldn't be something that's top-down coming from adults. It should be you asking for this. And I asked the kids to ask their parents to let them go out to play every day. They'd give up their phones if they were able to go out to play every day without parental supervision. And I think teachers should say the same thing. We will give up our phones if you stop giving us homework. Right? That's what kids should say to their teachers. It's not because we're not going to be doing our schoolwork. We'll do it in class, but the afternoon should be time for us to play. And if we have homework, we don't have any time to play. So for the last 5 minutes of my talk, and my apologies for overrunning slightly, I just wanted to show you a few little images from the comic strips I put together as part of this campaign. I'm just going to put them up on the screen and read out what they say. So here's the first one. I'm going out to play. And what do the parents say? We love you. We love you so much we'll let you go out to play. He's a bit antsy. He won't leave me alone. He's touching everything. He's getting bored. He doesn't know what to do. I don't know what to do with him. Well, just give him a phone. That's easy. Hey, I'm going out to play with my friends. And the parents say, well, don't run. Don't cross the street. Don't get dirty. Maybe you should... And the kid says, well, maybe I should just stay home and play on my PlayStation. You can't go out by yourself because our streets are dangerous. There's a lot of traffic. Stay home with your phone. This is danger. We tell you where to find drugs. These are the devastating images of the massacre victims, the banned images of violence. You don't need to go out to see Julieta, your friend. Why don't you just have a video call? But I wanted to give her a hug. Doctor? Paula's 6. She's always bored. She's really sad. Is there some sort of medical treatment? Well, yes. Let her go out by herself every day to play with her friends. This is outside at the age of 4. Hey, Dad. I'm going out to play with Pablo. Leaving the house, but you see the doors are open. There's no danger whatsoever. And this is at the age of 5, sitting on the stairs. I was playing at being teacher. Tomorrow we'll play at, putting together a show in the theater, or we'll go to the market. That's what I did when I was 5. Hey, I'm going out to play with Rosa and Luis, and I'll tell you all the details when I get back. Well, not all the details. And your friend is always going to be better than a cell phone. That's what we hope. Thank you very much.
Doncs sí, ens podem posar drets.
Yes, you can indeed give Francesco Tonucci a standing ovation.
Tot el Congrés en peu aplaudint.
Up on your feet, a big round of applause for this incredible talk. Francesco Tonucci, thank you so much. We have some students still filtering into the room, but we are going to kick off this dialogue just to make sure we don't end up finishing our Congress really late this afternoon. We do want to make sure we stick to the timing. So let me introduce our speakers. Ms. Angelica Satiro, good morning. Good morning. All right, so it's time for us to dive into our dialogue.
Amb els nostres participants, la Marcia, Tiburi.
So we have Marcia Tiburi and Joan-Carles Mèlich. Please feel free to start the dialogue whenever you'd like. Please get started.
Ya están entrando.
Pero empezamos igualmente.
Sí, mas agora já. Bom dia.
Good morning. I'll speak Portuguese. That's my native language. And I'll speak in Spanish at some times, since that is the language that both of our panelists share. Now, today's dialogue is entitled The Fragility of the World and the Strength of Education. Why did we think critical thinking was a key topic for this Congress about education and culture? In our cities, we're all facing great polarization, a culture of hate, a moment with misinformation, a moment when it's difficult to know what to do because the world is becoming more and more fragile. And that is why we're holding this dialogue. So before we start, I'd like to introduce our two panelists. I admire them. I really love their work. They're great thinkers. And I think they're two of the most important contemporary thinkers, each in their own field. They love education, they love knowledge, they love critical thinking and thought. And so I'd like to recommend that you read their books. They're really worth reading. They spent a long time thinking about all of the content they put into them, and they're incredibly well written. So both Joan-Carles Mèlich, a Catalan philosopher who's published many books, a professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and our other speaker, Marcia Tiburi, a Brazilian philosopher who was a professor at Paris, at one of the universities in Paris, and has worked on education. The two of them share one key idea. Starting with absolutes as a jumping-off point for our thought. Marcia Tiburi questions fascism. Joan-Carles Mèlich questions totalitarianisms. So in this polarized world, I think these two individuals will be great speakers to really inspire thought, inspire us to think about this. Now, you can read their bios online. They're pretty impressive, but with no further ado, I'd like to just tell you who's here. Marcia, Joan. Up on the bleachers, we've got teens, boys and girls, who have been part of the work of this Congress since September of last year. They're also working on critical thinking, and they're here to listen to us all today. Now, in the front rows, we have people who day in and day out are fighting in their cities to build our educating societies. Now, dialogue isn't just about the people who speak, it's also about the people who are listening. And so I thought it was important for us to set the stage by introducing you all to one another. Shall we dive in? All right. So, Now that we have set the stage, I'd like to point out that cities can't become battlegrounds. We talk about polarization, and that is actually happening. So we'll start with a few questions. How does space help to develop critical thinking right now, in your view? And what concrete, tangible conditions make it possible for critical thinking in an educating city? Who'd like to start?
Wow.
All right, I'll start. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, colleagues. I'm looking forward to the debate, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to commend the organizers. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. So first and foremost, I think it's very important for us to start with a definition. What is a city? Now, as we all know, a city is a place where we live, there are institutions, there are laws, and we build these institutions. But also from a philosophical point of view, we could say a city is a place where we have experiences. We experience these institutions, we experience these spaces. It's a place where today we also learn how to call for our rights to be respected. Philosophers have referred to the right to a city. I actually wrote about this. I wrote the visual right to a city. I'm from Sao Paulo, a city that is a place where pretty much every single centimeter, every millimeter is being fought over, including our visual spaces. There's quite a lot of issues in the city. We've got lots of street art, designs, poetry, ways that we occupy the city. It's people who are excluded from the city but want to have a right to express themselves within our cities. So it's a kind of graffiti called pichação in Sao Paulo. So I wanted to touch on the tie between this and otherness. I think this is very gradual, it's very complicated, it depends on the city and place. Now where I'm from, Sao Paulo, for example, and most Brazilian cities, we have a ton of violence and exclusion, a ton of poor governance, stupid governance, and actually we're constantly fighting about this, and I think critical thinking is people who think alongside this otherness, this change. It's a space that can be conquered. Now, I'd like to tell you an anecdote about critical thinking, so you understand what I mean in concrete, tangible terms. I think thinking, thought, philosophy, being a critical thinker calls for cities. In other words, we can only engage in critical thinking in concrete settings, based on a historical, concrete, physical point of view that's situated in both time and space. So that means starting with our history as a jumping-off point for thinking. Marxists would call this historic materialism, and I love that idea. But I'd like to tell you about something that I just learned a few days ago and really floored me. I was pretty uncomfortable, actually, but it made me rethink what we're talking about here today, what we're calling critical thinking. Now, Brazil's a huge country. 200 plus million residents. As is the case in every country, we have public intellectuals. You could call me a public intellectual in Brazil. I'm not the only one. We have other colleagues in the room who are visible on the public stage in different degrees, to different extents. Now, one person, a public thinker, somebody who gets some 700,000 reais, some 20,000 US dollars for each of their talks, somebody really well known with millions of followers on social networks. Somebody really, really well known. So this is somebody who is really well respected. He has some really solid opinions about a lot of topics, but a few days ago he said something that I thought was quite serious. It was a propaganda campaign for a bank. I'm sure he was paid big bucks, millions for it. And he said the following: critical thinking is important, but even more important than this is you getting a debit card from this bank so you can use it to make payments. In other words, he sold this as critical thinking, but look, I also really think we must defend critical thinking. I work in critical thinking, and I don't think anybody, him, Angelica, Joan, any of you in the room, should be selling critical thinking. Because critical thinking can't become a commodity. We can't transform it into a commodity. Critical thought is something that brings two ideas into contrast, right? Thought and commodity. Now, what is that? It's a way that we sell goods. We sell merchandise. So this quote-unquote thinker who sold critical thinking is a white guy. And that's also a type of a commodity. Not like a water bottle, or clothing, my pen, or our bodies of women, bodies of gay people, bodies of trans people, bodies of black people, bodies of anybody who's not a white dude. This white men enjoy their own positioning, and only white men could sell critical thinking this way. Because we're talking about social norms. And these are the internal social norms of white men in a capitalized, patriarchal society. Only such a person could sell critical thinking. Because we need to bear in mind that critical thinking could actually bring an end to the social role of white men. It's a way that we could all become equal. All right, one other key detail I'd like to share. Obviously, this is my own point of view, but if we think about things this way, from a situational point of view, I can only think of things based on where I am. So I make a personal effort. That means an ethical desire that this individual, this body that thinks about putting respect for otherness front and center is important. Now, what is this otherness? Otherness is others, other bodies, other cultures, other languages, other ways of thinking, other spaces, other territories, other cities, the city of others, the country of others. And so against this backdrop, I think it's very valid and useful for us today to tie the idea of critical thinking to a decolonialist, anti-colonial, counter-colonial point of view. So based on my own personal perspective, I can look at things this way, and I have to start by decolonializing my own way of thinking. In other words, I need to remove the white man's way of thinking from my way of thinking. I need to depatriarchalize, right? Remove the patriarchy from my own actions, my own language, from my own body. I need to remove racism. And none of this is possible without understanding the concrete, specific moment we're in this concrete moment in history. The only way we can do this is by really reflecting. And that's a key effort that calls for imagination. When I think about others and otherness, I can only understand others, put otherness as part of my way of thinking if I'm creative. And so, in a patriarchal, racist, colonialist world, we need to be very creative. It takes a lot of imagination. Imagination is how women have survived wars. Imagination is how poor people from all across the globe have survived these wars that are present. It's the way that people have overcome imposed suffering, suffering imposed by capitalism and by the patriarchy. So critical thinking, if I had to sum it up, would be a specific way of constructing a perspective about otherness by recalling where we came from, who we are, how we become who we are, the place that is the jumping off point for our thinking, and by making a radical effort to dismantle all of the things within us that have been passed on by the system. Well, thank you very much. Joan, we've heard from Marcia. What about you? What do you think is the jumping off point for critical thinking? Well, thank you, Angelica. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. And Marcia, it's a huge pleasure to chat with you. I fully agree with what you said, and the way you said it, the words you stressed, otherness. For me, I think otherness is a radical idea. Now, when I was asked to talk about critical thinking, when I started discussing it with the other panelists, we had a little meeting, and the first thing that came to mind was a phrase written by Walter Benjamin, the German philosopher, at the beginning of one of his works, Childhood in Berlin in the 1900s. And he said the following: "It's not very important if you don't know how to get around in a city. In contrast, getting lost in a city, like people getting lost in a forest, requires you to learn." I've been thinking this over for years. I read it there, in that book. Walter Benjamin, of course, is a Marxist author from the first generation of critical thinking. And based on this quotation, I'm going to try to answer your question, Angelica, but I'm going to flip it on its head. The question isn't about what makes critical thinking possible. I think that was your question, but rather I'd like to answer the following. Actually, the opposite of your question. What do we have in our cities that is preventing us from critical thinking right now? I'll be very, very critical. I know there's a risk here. It can seem very superficial. And obviously, I could speak at length about each of these topics. But the first thing I'd like to share, I'm going to share a few different snippets, a few different ideas. But I'd like to begin by citing a type of philosophy that I think is being imposed in our societies, our cities, our universities. And I would call it the following: the logic of techno-economic reasoning. Technical and economic reasoning. The imperialism of this techno-economic reasoning. Our cities, our schools are being colonialized by this techno-economic logic. And we could say that until Marx started writing in the 19th century, and also well into the 20th century, economic issues, as Marcia well said, Marx really describes this well, the capitalist economic colonialization of the world. The first idea in The Capital talks about the idea of commodity, of goods. And he did this on purpose. Capitalist societies are societies that can transform anything into a commodity. Anything can be sold. Anything can be bought. So this economic colonialization of the world today is fleshed out with a technological element. Now, technological and technical aren't the same things. I think this is a really important distinction to draw, but very few people do. That's the difference between something technical and something technological. Something technical could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, it could be used well, it could be used poorly. But we've had technical things since the beginning of time. However, technology is something very different. It's a recent invention, and as its name indicates, technology comes from a Greek word, logos, which means a ton of different things in Greek, but it also means reasoning, reason. That's one of the most known meanings of the word logos. So technological reason means there's a technological vision of the world. Marcia touched on various perspectives. And the technological or techno-economic reason entails negating any perspective that's not your own. A single worldview, a totalitarian worldview, of course, is imposed. And that's because technology is a totalitarian view of the world because it rules out any other perspectives. And if a perspective rules out other perspectives, it's no longer a perspective. By definition, we need to have a variety of perspectives. If there's only one point of view, then we don't have points of view. And that's what technology has done. And if you don't have a variety of perspectives, a variety of points of view, you don't have critical thinking. Now, I could speak about this for length, but let me try to sum up. I told you I'd mention a few different aspects of this techno-economic colonialization of the world so that we can think it over and, of course, criticize it. First, the tyranny of utility. Techno-economic reason starts with a key question. It imposes upon us. What's the use of this thing? Let's say I'm going to start studying Greek. Well, why? What's the point? Going to study philosophy. Why? How's it going to be useful for you? Social work and education. Sure, we'll start with the history of education. We'll start with the Iliad. Why are you reading this? What's the point? When you've got new curricula touching on this, I mean, how many of these curricula are actually talking about the history of education? Not social education, just education. You know how many times this is mentioned? 0. Not a single time. I think any educator who doesn't understand that Achilles was one of the founding fathers of Europe doesn't understand Europe. And Europe was also based on one key ban. Don't eat the forbidden fruit. Now, what's the point here? Second, bureaucracy. Kafka realized early in the century, when he was talking about his major works, he realized this process. Max Weber did too in his works. What's the negative side of bureaucracy? All of the paperwork. Kafka referred to this. And I have to say, well, I'm really part of this worldview because I think civil servants are the negative side of bureaucracy, but I'm also a civil servant. So what happened with this techno-economic form of logic? What turned civil servants into, or rather, what made civil servants no longer just an administrative official? What turned them into an existential figure? A civil servant is somebody who carries out a role. They're a servant. They don't think. There's an incredible piece written by a Marxist writer, Bertolt Brecht, The History of Mr. K. And one of the characters asks the other one, and they say if a civil servant's asking questions, they're not a good civil servant. If they're thinking, they're not a good civil servant. And of course, I know there's a lot of shades of understanding here, but when you think about Hannah Arendt, and she covered the Eichmann trial, when he was sentenced to death for crimes against humanity, Eichmann, like many others, didn't simply say, I was following orders. What he said was even more serious. He said, I was following the law. And people asked him, well, if you had been asked to kill your father, would you have done so? And he said, this is in the historic record, Eichmann said, if the Führer orders me to do so, of course I will. And it's not me who's saying this. Hannah Arendt says that if there had been a battery of psychological tests, Eichmann would have passed it. He wasn't crazy. Unfortunately, he was, as Hannah Arendt said, somebody who was terribly normal. Third, time flying by at a breakneck speed. Students, you know this, and a warm welcome to you all. You know that you have less time for every class. You've got more turnover of teachers. Teachers coming in, you've got group work, but of course it's not really group work. That's something completely different. But anyways, that's a story for another day. But what we've got is this breakneck speed. I've called this something that has to be done incredibly fast in my works. And I think we need to have what I call a cordial relationship with time. Things need to take time. If we don't have this cordial relationship with time, it's completely impossible to think. We don't even have to talk about critical thinking. You simply can't think if you don't take your time to do so. The first thing we need to do to think is to simply stop. Take a moment. If you don't have any time, bureaucrats, civil servants, they don't have any time. They're simply complying with their orders. And finally, the most serious thing is the great crisis of humanities. What's happening in our cities, in our universities, in our schools is of the utmost concern. And when I talk about humanities, I'm simply talking about reading, writing, and studying. Today, right now, nobody writes. Everyone drafts, but drafting isn't writing. Today, right now, nobody reads. Everyone seeks information. But seeking information is not reading. Today, right now, nobody studies. Did you notice nobody says study anymore? What are we doing now? We're researching. Today, right now, everybody's researching, but nobody is studying.
Yeah?
Sí.
Son dos grandes.
Two of the best.
Muy bien.
They're communicating. This is a dialogue involving all of us. Thank you very much for communicating. The pillar of critical thinking. Philippe Mérier and Marina Garcés were present. And I think we could include some of the things that they said previously so that we can move forward. Mérier said that critical thinking is an unsatisfactory relationship with the world. We're always wanting more, trying to understand the world, and that's why the relationship's unsatisfying. Marina Garcés said that thinking critically is linked to abstract elements. But critical thinking means being able to exchange the way in which we understand life. And I think that that helps us to create a role of critical thinking in an educating city. And you, Joan, said that without critical thinking, the city would stop being inhabitable. And you, Marcia, you didn't say this now, but you've said it previously, that critical thinking is the only thing that can underpin responsible living in this world. Taking into account these concepts, we are people who make educating cities, and I'd like you to help us think about the way in which these concepts and this way of understanding critical thinking can help us to be an educating city using our critical thinking. Well, Angelica, I think there are two avenues that are always available. One is the government, and the other is education. So just quickly, I'd like to talk about those two things, government and education. When I referred to the philosopher who was selling critical thought, I spoke about somebody who imploded. He imploded. In philosophy, we like to talk with interesting terms useful for city graffiti. For example, performative self-contradiction. But we could say the person imploded, saying something that was contradictory. So he just imploded. And I'm saying this because some time ago, I thought a lot about Paulo Freire, I'm sure you all know him, who spoke about banking education. And we could also talk about banking philosophy. Banking philosophy and banking education are the precise opposite of critical thinking. the precise opposite of critical education. Critical education, which isn't banking education, is that education enabling people to understand the play, the power play in a body, enabling a person to become independent. So this is ethical education, if you like. And that person who is educated by way of critical thinking is autonomous and independent, so won't become a commodity, neither in thought or actions. And that's a person who can govern themselves, together with the world around them, with the other people, with their peers, can govern in a way that's not an authoritarian way. Eichmann, the Nazi, like Franco, like many others, you're all aware of them because all countries have their own dictator. They're all paranoid. Donald Trump today, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and so many others. All of these Hitler candidates, if you like, none of them would be able to use critical thought because they come from a different form of thought. They were educated through banking education, and that's true. They're not people who became what they are by chance. They were dirtied, they were sullied, they were prevented from understanding authority through a different form of education, and an education of coldness. And a lot of people, a lot of thinkers, Walter Benjamin, said that technical reasoning is a form of domination. And really argued about that. And that makes us all become civil servants in a system, not civil servants in state bureaucracies, but there's no doubt about it, we become slaves to these gadgets, to screens, to computers. We become people who work according to how we're dictated to, including by artificial intelligence, every apart from critical thinking, apart from imagine. And when you say that nobody writes anymore, but they draft, and that's exactly what we're talking about. And I wanted to say this in particular for the young people, something that happened to me a few days ago. I'm a writer, and I write. I've been writing for a long time, since I learnt to write, in fact. And I learnt to write with a child, and I've never stopped writing. I went to school, and I was taught to fill pages with letters. I've never forgot about the experience I had. I still draw letters and illustrate as well. Why am I telling you this? Because when I was finishing a book, which took me 8 years to write, I finished it 2 days ago. I was telling you that, and I finished it here. Somebody I live with said, "Why don't you use artificial intelligence to finish everything?" That's what that person said, based on the fact that a woman writer won a Nobel Prize this year and uses artificial intelligence to write. It's a scandal, but that's the way the world is today. Artificial intelligence has turned us all into cynics, and I responded to that person, the person I live with. But I exist because I write. I need to write just to feel alive. So I couldn't subcontract my existence to a machine. And that's what we're saying when we revolt against artificial intelligence and technical reasoning and technology. We want to exist, and existing is extremely difficult in an era of performance when our images are being transformed into commodities, in an era when our feelings, hatred and love, have also been transformed into commodities. Finally, I think we do need to govern, and governing means fighting to ensure that our ideas are standardized. We need to organize ourselves. And that's why the world hasn't been destroyed by people, authoritarians, people such as Hitler, Franco, Bolsonaro, or Donald Trump. We're resisting precisely because we have critical thought, and we keep that alive because we're able to imagine otherness, and because we're able to fight for a space where different ideas can exist. And that's why we want to progress. I don't have time now, but I would like to talk about eco-social feminism. Thank you very much.
A Marcia, que tem essa...
Well, thanks. That feminist perspective, that eco-feminist perspective, that was used to go against fascism in Brazil. I'm just giving you that information. That's what she's talking about. Now, Joan, we're talking now about what is essential to make an educating city through critical thinking. What do you think about this? Well, things are hotting up. I like this. I had so many things I wanted to say. I echo what Marcia said. Then, regarding your initial question, when you spoke about Murier and Garcés, but first of all, talking about artificial intelligence, if I ask AI to write a text for me, it writes it perfectly. And that is the problem. It's not a human text. It's written by a machine. It's all perfect. I have to tell you something. I'm afraid I have to confess to this. I put a recently written text of mine. Check out Google on AI mode. I posted a text. I just wanted to see if I could cheer myself up. And I said, what philosopher might have written this text? And AI said, undoubtedly, Joan-Carles Mèlich. And I thought, ooh, I've got my own style. But we could improve on it, was the next thing that AI said to me. It's not Joan-Carles Mèlich's text, because obviously texts can be improved upon. Even those texts written by a Nobel Prize winner can be improved. But the style pertains to this person. In an interview with Jorge Luis Borges, people said that Cervantes wrote badly, and Borges was saying this, by the way. When he wrote Quixote, well, it was perfect. People said Dostoevsky didn't know how to write. Gosh, I wish I could write The Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment. But this has to do precisely with the question that Angelica asked. We need to get back to the founding text, which is the 7th book of the Republic. We need to read Plato again, not because we agree with Plato. I don't agree with Plato. I agree with Sophocles. They were contemporaries, by the way. But we'd need a class on this. No, what I'm saying is that we need to go back to the allegory of the cave, because Plato, in that, and just think about this, philosophy teachers explain this badly sometimes. The prisoner in the cave didn't untie his shackles and get out, but he was untied and then, against his will, because of an act of violence, was forced to leave the cave. He was unshackled. Maria Zambrano underscored that very well. I sometimes meet students who say the prisoner breaks free, but Plato never said that. On the contrary, the prisoner doesn't want to break free. And then Plato gives us his reading of the truth and so on. We live in a cave. What does that mean? That we live in a world of shadows. And a world of shadows is a world full of ambiguity. It's a world full of doubt, of uncertainty. And in order to be able to inhabit the world humanly, not in an AI fashion, not like a bot. The other day I saw an episode of Black Mirror. I can't remember which one it was, but we were talking about that with my students. It's amazing because you can see quite clearly a girl's partner dies, and a kind of cyborg is created. I think it's the 7th season of Black Mirror, and this cyborg is perfect. He never contradicts her, and she says, "But you're the same. Everything about you is the same." But it's a clone of her partner because her partner died. "You can't agree with me," she says. And the cyborg says, "Would you like me to contradict you?" And she says, "Well, of course I want you to contradict me, but I don't want to have to tell you have to contradict me. You need to contradict me because it comes from you, not because I'm telling you to do that. You haven't understood a thing. So if the city becomes a puzzle in which no piece fits, that's when we're living in a totalitarian universe, be it political, economic, technological. And of course, that's when educators become guides. People who know the way and who show us where we have to go. Just remember one thing. Guide in German is Führer. Wow. A round of applause. They're amazing. A round of applause. They're amazing, aren't they? Well, as I said, these are two dear friends. We could probably continue yakking on for hours. There's a lot to talk about, but we've been told that we need to stick to the schedule. So one last question for you. If you can summarize as much as possible. Now, look. People tend to think that critical thinking, and it's wrong. Thinking about one thing is one thing, feeling is another thing, everything's compartmentalized, and people tend to think that critical thinking is not connected to life itself. Marcia. Now, talking about feminism in common, you say that we need to build societies based on mutual care and the protection of bodies and vulnerable people, and critical thinking is connected to life. And you, Joan, in your ethics of compassion, not empathy, you show that ethics don't stem from abstract laws, but from how you deal with pain and how you respond carefully to suffering. Therefore, the connection between critical and ethical thinking, could that help us to come up with some ideas as to how to live with that emotional confusion and all of the crises that are taking place? How can critical thinking help us in these complex contexts? Please try to be brief. 3 minutes if you can. Well, 3 minutes. We're governed by platform states, and some countries are still governed by the church. We're governed by authoritarian personalities. Education can be seen as a government as well. It needs to be worked on as a form of ethics, awareness about the production of subjectivity. As educators, be we education politicians, teachers, whatever, education thinkers, we need to provide avenues so that students, be they little children, young people or adults, can become independent so that they can think and govern themselves without any kind of hierarchy. There's no need to construct permanent, intense education. I think, obviously I can't talk about everything I want to talk about now, but I have developed a theory which is eco-social feminism. I mentioned it earlier. Unlike politics of violence and enmity and promoting racist capitalism, a defense of life, a defense of living on Earth. And I really like Eliane Brun's perspective, because she said something extremely important. She's been working a long time on this, and it's important to refer to her work. She was here, and she spoke about moving the center of the world. And that means thinking about a different geography, a different space, refocusing the center, moving from major cities or major economic hubs to nature, moving back to forests. But that will be possible only if people change the way in which they govern the world. And the global government will never be able to make that change while authoritarian men are in charge. I've been talking about eco-social feminism. I believe that that is in the hands of the radical democracy, including all social movements. And I'm including feminism because that sums up many of the social movements that we have. Particularly in Brazil, we've got movements for Earth, for LGBT people, indigenous people, black people, and movements of feminist women. In Brazil, there's an anti-feminist movement as well. It's extremely dangerous, and I like to say that we're feminist movements. And that's what I wanted to talk about, so that we can reflect together. It's not necessarily a response, but it's a call to think. And I think that's our role as educators, public intellectuals, politicians, people who continue to think in a critical fashion against the authoritarian language and that consumerism of language and the cliches of social networks and ready-made discourse. So my defense of critical thinking is the defense of dialogue, and sometimes we do need to create a cave like Plato did, forcing people to be able to think for themselves for our own survival on a planet that deserves to survive, because Earth didn't ask us to be here. So we have an even greater responsibility. Thank you very much. Joan, your final thoughts on critical thinking and that compassionate ethics. Well, in my view, to have critical thinking, we need to keep alive that tension that will never be fully resolved between three spheres of the city, which are as follows. And I'm giving you this order, but there's no specific order. First of all, the political order. Political laws, which are symbolized by what was discussed by Creonte and Antigone. Now, together with the political sphere, we've got the moral sphere. Just briefly, morals are a set of values, rules, norms, habits that belong to a specific culture at a specific time in history. There are no universal morals. They're cultural, historical, etc. So, specifically, what do I think is interesting? What needs to be rethought here from the point of view of morals? Because morals need to be looked at from the perspective of critical thinking. I think that what's important here is understanding that not only is urban development important, but rather what's urban is more important. A city can be inhabitable, it can be cordial. When I go and have a coffee and someone brings me the bill, we tend to say thank you. When somebody, well, we could talk about this at length, when you're sitting on a bus, not on the seats reserved for the elderly and the disabled, but it's awful that we have to actually set aside seats for these people. But what's worse is seeing who sits on those seats and who is next to those people and does absolutely nothing about it. That's urbanity. It's easy to say this person's a fascist, full stop, but no, I think that's really important. I think respect is of the utmost importance, as is listening. All of that forms part of morals. And Marcia has said this. Ethics. Morals are important, but they're not enough. There's something more. Ethics. That's the dark side of morals. Ethics is the face-to-face relationship between moral rules, according to which we've been educated, and that's where there can be a crisis. And therefore, sometimes, in order to be ethical, that is, in order to be compassionate, to be cordial, to aid the other in their suffering, I have to call into question the rules of politics and the rules of morals. An ethical response will never be sufficient. If the ethical response is sufficient and I have a clear conscience, well, ethics has disappeared completely. Thank you very much, Joan. Thank you, all of you as well. Children, teenagers, thank you very much. I'd like to conclude by inviting each and every one of you to go back to your city with that clear idea. I'm a critical thinker. I can continue to think critically because I'm not just a civil servant, I'm not a slave or a bot. And through dialogue we can develop critical thinking involving everybody who lives in cities. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Gracias. Pronto.
Molt